Hello, hello. If anyone's here, say what's up in the chat. Sorry, I had a previous live stream planned, and then I just had to take a call that was really important. So I'm back on. I apologize if anyone tried to join earlier. If anyone has any questions, I just figured I'd check in with you guys and answer some questions because I'm bored, and I really enjoyed the last one. So. Hello, hello, hello. If anyone's here, feel free to use the chat. I'm trying this new format. Yeah, tested it earlier this week and actually had a lot of fun doing this live Q&A. So figured try it again if anyone has any pressing questions they want to talk about. See, some people are joining, not that many. If not, we could try this again another time, but I also wanted to try to see if I could like screen share, but I'm not sure how to do that in this live format here. We'll give this a few minutes, but if not enough people join, we'll try it again. To whoever just joined, yeah, I just figured I'd do a little live Q&A if anyone has any questions. Also, just I want to continue testing this streaming format because I plan on doing a lot more live streams in the future. So yeah, I just figured you guys could use this as an opportunity to ask whatever questions are on your mind, anything about design or your career or anything else. Happy to be a resource for you. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. I wish there was a way I could screen share. I think I might need another, like an external tool to use so I can like share my screen because I can't figure out how to do it within this YouTube live stream thing. But yeah, any questions, use the chat. Sorry if I keep repeating myself, but again, this is more of just a test of this format, but I figured I'm happy to be a resource for you guys if you have any questions. So. If you guys can hear me, can you just like drop something in the chat too? Maybe it's my audio. It says my mic is on. This is like a little coffee time. If you have any questions, let me know. Anything you guys are struggling with or working on or anything you want me to cover on this channel. It says there's a few of you guys here, so take it you joined because you might have some questions. So again, this is your time. It's funny, I scheduled this call for 5 o'clock and then I just received a call from a potential employer. So I had to log off the live stream, take the call. It went very well. So pretty happy about it, but would love to hear what you guys are working on. There's a question. From James McCarthy, I've enjoyed your videos and work. Do you have a wireframing phase? I'm assuming you're asking like, do I generally do wireframes in my process? I think it depends. Like, I wouldn't say it depends. Like, if I'm working for a client and they already have a design system and a visual language, like usually I can just jump right into high fidelity. I'll almost always sketch something out, and I'll always like come up with a flow, right, based on user stories or whatever, like based on the user requirements. I like to first come up with a flow, like kind of step one, user does this, step two, user does this, or user needs to see this. And then I'll just sketch something really roughly. I either have scratch paper or even this, I keep this whiteboard by my desk, which I use a lot. My new office setup is going to be a lot better for this. I'm going to have like a big ass whiteboard on my wall. I'm actually moving apartments in a few weeks. So yeah, really looking forward to that. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I do wireframes. Again, it depends on the client, depends on the project. Sometimes I'll spend a lot more time in low fidelity. Sometimes I'll sort of jump right into high fidelity if I'm solving like a very specific problem and I already have components to work with. Yeah, hopefully that answered your question. Thank you and keep up the work, man. You are super talented. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you're working on, James, or any other questions you have? Or I'm interested in hearing about your guys' journey and kind of like where you're at in your career. Because I'm actually about to, I spoke about this in my last live stream, but I'm interested in hearing about like where you guys are, if you're just starting out in design or if you're more senior. Because I feel like everything for me has I feel like everything for me has like happened very quickly, and I don't pretend that I'm like, the messiah of this stuff, but I feel like I know what my strengths are in design and I know where I need to improve. And I've sort of learned a lot. I've had a lot of good opportunities that have allowed me to grow really quickly. So I feel like I can at least speak to some of this stuff. You're a software dev, much more boring. What kind of software? Front end, back end? I don't think software dev is boring. I think it's just like a different way of thinking. Like I'm very right-brained dominant, like very like I'm like an ideas guy and like not so much logical. Like I have to be like if I'm working in a logical fashion, I have to be very prescriptive up front and like really document everything. I have so many ideas and my brain works very creatively. It's the analytical, more logic-based stuff that doesn't really come natural for me, which is why I really love webflow, because it's like it's finally empowering people like myself to start building their designs basically. So are you front end or back end, James, if you're still in here? Maybe he left. Anyone else who just joined have any questions? I'm kind of just using this as an opportunity to connect with some of you guys who probably missed some of the tutorial videos. I know I've been slacking. There's just been a lot on my plate. I'm going through a big career transition and I'm working on this UI animation course for you guys. And I'm also moving. So lots has been going on. Took a little break from work and, reassessed where I'm at career-wise. And I finally got something really awesome lined up, which I'll be sure to tell you guys more about. Webflow is the rad. Yeah, Webflow is rad. I really enjoy it. But again, it's for the I root for it killing WordPress. Yeah, I think as far as like the level of customization that you can do, I think Webflow is great. I mean, WordPress, I've never actually like built WordPress websites, but from my understanding, there's like a lot of like pre-built like components, and it's sort of like it's more of like a web builder, like drag and drop. Whereas Webflow, you have to know a little more front end like frameworks and concepts, but you get so much more customization that way, which is great because designers they're great at designing, but haven't always been good at building, which is why something like WordPress in the past has made a lot of sense. But now that, with a little bit of front end understanding, and there's so many great tutorials even on the Webflow YouTube channel, it just makes it so easy to learn and start building. Anyone else have any questions, or James, do you have any other questions? I don't know how long I'll be on tonight, but yeah, just wanted to pop in. I've been really enjoying this format. I know I don't have too many subscribers, so I can't guarantee a ton of people will join, but I think giving this video a thumbs up might help. What kind of software are you building, James? Is it like enterprise software? Is it consumer software? Anyone working on any cool projects or challenging projects or running into any roadblocks? For those just joining, feel free to use the chat and drop your questions there. I'm really trying to figure out if I can like eventually screen share on this. Because I think doing some, like weekly live streams, if it's like a certain theme to eat, like maybe Monday is like I cover a certain topic every Monday or every Wednesday is something. I'm trying to figure out how to approach this. So I'm sort of testing this with you guys. You guys are like the guinea pigs to this format. But yeah, anyone else have any questions? I didn't have anything really planned. So I'm kind of leaving this up to you. But if no one has any questions, I don't have to be on here forever. I know it's Friday. Thank God. I'm not sure how accurate this counter is. I run a small agency working in the healthcare and legal space. Work with a few public hospitals. I was impressed with your baseball animation. Oh, the dashboard. Yeah, thank you. That was fun. That was more just like a visual exploration. And like that was when I was like first learning Studio. But it was fun. Yeah, it shows like what you can do in Studio. And yeah, that's cool though. What healthcare and legal. Interesting. I was at a healthcare client recently. It's an interesting industry for sure. Do you have any advice to new UX designers that lack work experience? Yeah, I mean, this is something I'm always trying to cover. It's tough as a new UX designer because you obviously need experience to get the job, but you need the job to get the experience. So yeah, there are a few things you can do, and I've spoken about this in the past. I'm sure you guys are aware, there's like boot camps you could take, but these tend to be pretty pricey and, in my opinion, not all that necessary. If I were a new UX designer, I mean, I think you guys all know if you're trying to land a UX design job, your ticket into these jobs is your portfolio, right? And in your portfolio, every UX interview I've had, pretty much I'm going through at least one or two case studies in my portfolio. So definitely my recommendation is try to have at least 2 case studies, like fully baked case studies that kind of show your product thinking and also your visual design skills, especially as a junior UX designer. And I covered this in the last live stream. I think visual design skills are really important. I think coming out of boot camps, a lot of times the expectation is like you understand the entire end-to-end product design journey. So everything from like user research through user interviews, through synthesizing that research, to drawing insights, to creating personas, to like the whole gamut of the journey. You might think that's expected to you as a junior, but I think in reality, and this is a bit controversial and we touched on this last time, I think it'd be a better use of your time to really dial in your visual UI design skills first, just to sort of check that box. And then everything else, like the user research and the entire end-to-end journey, you'll likely learn more on the job. So I don't think a hiring manager is really going to expect you to like understand everything end to end, at least initially. But one box you can check, and one thing you can build in your free time without even having work experience, is your visual design skill set. So some resources there. Obviously, watch my videos, but I hate to refer people to Dribbble because it's such a reductionist place for product design these days. Like I think designers think like what you see on Dribbble is like what actually goes into the entire product design process. And of course it's a big part of it, but it sort of just scratches the surface. Like most of the product thinking sort of happens behind the scenes. But yeah, go on Dribbble and like, at least from a visual design standpoint, see kind of like what the new UI trends are. Even I recommend just taking screenshots and literally copying pixel for pixel what these designers do on Dribbble. So you get a sense of like spacing paradigms. Also, one thing I would recommend, one thing I always do, I wish I could share my screen. One thing I always do in Figma, I always have up the material design guidelines and the Apple human interface guidelines. So if I really need, so like rather than like spinning my wheels and trying to figure out like, what size should this button be, or like what is a good mobile font size? Like I sort of just refer to these because as a product designer, we're usually only designing for iOS or Android if we're designing native apps. So those are really good places to like always have like easy access to. And that'll really help your visual design skills, at least for native mobile product work. And then, you know, web design, there's, you know, material design guidelines for that as well. But yeah, honestly, it just comes with practice. And I guess another thing I would recommend for new designers is say yes to every opportunity that comes your way, even if it's like not the most exciting work. Just always having something to show, like a potential recruiter, or every opportunity comes with just like opportunities to grow. So whether you're growing your visual design skill set or you're solving new problems, like this is all really important to just growing as a designer. Even just communicating your designs, getting feedback. So the more situations you can put yourselves in where you're exposed to the product design process, is going to help you. So hopefully that answered your question, Julia. But yeah, I know it's tough as a new designer, but yeah, just keep at it. If your heart's in it, you'll eventually find something. That's what I learned. I kind of just took a leap, and you know, this field really resonated with me. I think I've always been a little more creatively inclined than some of my counterparts, at the expense of like I talked about earlier, like the more analytical. Like I always sucked at math and like anything where I had to do a lot of like, you know, process oriented thinking. Like it was really tough. I was very visual, so I naturally sort of gravitated to this space, and I think it's been a great, you know, it feels right. So if it feels right in your heart, just keep going, keep it up, keep building your skills. And of course, networking is a big part of it too, but I'm sure you already know that. So how did I get into animation? That's a good question. Let me take a sip of this tea first. So with animation, specifically UI animation, I'm assuming, because that's most of the stuff I talk about on this channel. It started off like, you know, me, like right when I graduated college, I've told some of you guys this, like I was a management consultant my first 2 years. So some of these projects to be honest, I absolutely hated. I was like making PowerPoints and doing Excel stuff all day. And I don't know, while I'm doing this, I'm like, wow, I should just like create an app or start a company, because that would be way more exciting. So I would like have all these like ideas, which probably sucked at the time, even though I thought they were great. So it started with like just me thinking of problems to solve, and then just like kind of teaching myself how to like design screens. Like I would learn Sketch or whatever and just start like designing ideas, just like intuitively sort of learning the process without even like really knowing what the product design process was. When it came to animation, like what I would do is I would design all my screens, and then I got really like fascinated with the idea of seeing how far I could take the screen design. So the next logical step was like, once I did all my wireframes and once I did all my visual design, I would like try to bring those to life and actually make it look and feel like an actual app, even though it wasn't actually coded. So that got me interested in tools like prototyping tools like Flinto and at the time Principle, and even like Marble. I just thought it was the coolest thing, like being able to like play with an app on your phone, even though it was just a prototype. Like it felt like an actual app, and just like being able to say like, I created this, like this was my idea and I did all of this. And it just got me like really interested in like seeing how far I could push my ideas. And yeah, and then like, I guess at the same time I was looking on like Dribbble and seeing what other top designers were doing. And I just thought it was really cool, like how they were using motion to tell a story and demonstrate a user journey and add delight and all these things that I talk about. So hopefully that answered your question, James. How many projects do you think is needed for a portfolio to get your first job? I would say, well, it depends what type of job, because like, are you talking more about like an end-to-end product designer? Like, because a product designer, I'm sure you guys are seeing that title everywhere if you're looking on job boards. That's sort of like the new normal, even though it's more or less the same thing as a UX designer. I mean, it's inherently not the same thing as a UX designer, but I think what happened is a lot of people in like Silicon Valley, like the Googles and the Facebooks and these top tech companies started, renaming UX designer to product designer, because in their mind, a product designer is thinking beyond just the user experience. They're also thinking like, how does this product benefit the business? So it's the user and the business are like the two key players. But then everyone started seeing like the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples labeling these roles as product designers. So they started doing it, even though what they're really referring to is more user experience. So just focusing on the user. But now everyone just calls it a product designer. So for the most part, product and UX kind of mean the same thing. I don't know why I started saying that. What was your actual question? Oh, how many projects do you need for a portfolio? Yeah. So the reason I brought that up is if you're trying to land a job as a product designer, I would definitely recommend, like I said, at least 2 case studies, because case studies go beyond just the visual design, UI design output. It's showing your entire thought process and what problem you were trying to solve, and what research you did and how you learned about your user to make some informed design decisions. So I would say, yeah, you probably need at least, my recommendation if you're going for a product designer role or UX designer role, at least 2 case studies, ideally probably 3. But I've never really talked about more than 2 projects in any one interview. So I would say like you'd probably be safe with 2. And then maybe if like one is more like heavy on UI and less so much end-to-end thinking, that's probably sufficient. But again, if you're applying for like a visual designer, UI designer, or even like a design system lead position, like you can kind of tailor your portfolios to those specific roles. So it's not like there's a one size fits all answer, right? Or if like you're interviewing for an illustrator position, you're probably not going to have case studies. You really want to focus on the craft itself. So yeah, it depends on the role, but assuming you mean like a end-to-end designer, like a UI UX kind of hybrid designer, I would say at least 2 case studies. I was a front-end developer for a long time and transitioned into UX UI. I really only like doing the task flows, wireframe, and visual UI the most, and hate user research. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people probably feel that way. But the fact of the matter is, and this is the problem with sites like Dribbble and like even Behance sometimes, there's just been this dribbleization of design where designers sort of get the wrong impression about what it means to be a product designer. Like it's not so much the visuals, it's more like what problem are we trying to solve? Because if you were to send me, say I'm trying to hire you as a UI UX designer, and you send me your portfolio and you just show me a bunch of visuals with no context, right? Like as to like what problem you were trying to solve and how you went about doing it, and who is your user. That doesn't really mean anything to me, because I could say objectively, okay, this looks nice. Like you have really good hierarchy here and spacing, and your type work is solid and the color palette's nice. But beyond that, it's like, how do I know this is a successful product? Like, how do I know that you designed for a specific user in mind and you met their needs and goals and addressed their pain points? And how do I know like this product brings value to not only the user but the business, right? So it's hard to understand that without a little more context. But like I said, like if you are just trying to go,
trouble connecting to the internet.
Sorry,
Take a look at the help section in your Alexa.
1 second. My Alexa just went off. I just unplugged her. I killed her. But yeah, if you're going for a UX or a UI design position, you probably don't need as much context. So I feel what you're saying about not necessarily liking the user research part of it, but it is. When we're talking about user-centered design or human-centered design, like these big buzzwords that you hear, it's like, that's what it's all about. It's designing for a specific user in mind. So if you just show me the visuals, like I can't say for sure that you're a good user-centered designer. I could say that maybe you're a good visual designer, which is, don't get me wrong, that's a big part of it. But yeah, it is important to have a holistic understanding, I think, especially if you want to brand yourself as an end-to-end designer and demand more salary-wise and just be a more valuable designer in the marketplace. But looks like every job list expects you to do user research. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, so sort of what I just covered. Yeah, I mean, I would say most UI UX design positions these days do expect a little. I think they might be sort of asking for way more than like what you probably have, or like what you'll actually be doing on the job, but they do that to sort of, they get a little greedy. So yeah, the reality is having a good user-centered approach is important. I will say, like, you don't have to, like the problem with these boot camps, and I talked about this on my last stream. I think these boot camps, they cover everything, right? So they cover everything end to end, and they show you all these tools and frameworks like journey mapping and personas and, what do you call them? Like, what's the word? Experience maps, like all these maps. Everyone's obsessed with maps, affinity maps. Like these are just tools to help you understand your user and understand the problem that you're solving, more or less. So I wouldn't get too caught up in the jargon, as long as you're sort of addressing the key things that you need to address. So And I'll talk more about like an approach and a framework that I really like, but this will be a whole separate video. But just at a high level, I like the 5W 1H approach, which is the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So as long as you sort of like frame your user-centered process around addressing all of that, you'll be in a good place. So like I usually start with why, right? Like, why are we doing this? That's a question you always want to ask yourself. Like, why are we doing this? What problem are we solving? How does this help our user? How does this help the business, right? So like this is all kind of encompassed under the why section. And then once you define your why and you really understand the problem, then you can go about moving into who, right? So it's a little out of order, but you go why, then who. So who is our audience? And sometimes your audience is multiple. You have multiple audiences, right? Like if I were Spotify, you have your listeners, you have your artists, you have your businesses, right? So they each, all of these different groups of audiences have sort of different needs and different pain points. And you can't always, like a specific feature isn't always going to address all of your audiences. So you might have to sort of frame the problem you're solving in that sense. Like I want to solve this problem for this specific user and their specific needs. So then once you have your why, your who, then you start moving into your what, right? And you can sort of just like move down the process. And I'll talk more at length about this framework, but it's a really helpful framework. Everything else, like a customer journey map or something, that's just a tool you can use to help you understand your audience. So don't get too caught up in the jargon and all these frameworks and, card sorting activities. Like these are all great tools, but I would focus more on the basics, like the who, what, when, where, why, and then like the how do we measure at the end. I don't want to go too in the weeds in this video, but hopefully that was helpful. Do UI UX designers learn to code like React? No. And anyone who expects you to know React or like know how to code, I mean, in the 3 to 4 years that I've been doing this professionally, I've never once had to code. I will say if you're working at like a startup and maybe you're like a 2-man team and maybe that's a scenario in which you would be forced to code. I will say it's helpful to understand like some front end frameworks, especially for like web design. I can speak to a little bit better. Like if you understand grids and like how things break from screen to screen, like if you're designing for desktop, tablet, and mobile, right, you have to understand like how the layout sort of responds to different screen sizes. So that's like concepts and frameworks like that are really helpful. But as far as like knowing React, like I don't think so. And anyone who tells you otherwise is probably wrong. We're working for a company with bad design culture because, yeah, I think it's ridiculous to ask designers to also code. That's why we have software engineers as well. I mean, more power to you if you want to do both. I'm not stopping you, but more so UX and UI designer. Oh, so that was in relation to your other question. I see. How to get started as a freelancer? How do I get clients? Yeah, it's for me, I think it was interesting because I actually got a lot of clients from this YouTube channel, kind of accidentally. Like I originally sort of started this YouTube channel as a way almost to build some credibility as a designer. So I looked at this YouTube channel sort of as a supplement to my portfolio when I was when I was applying to roles initially, because I not only wanted to show my work, but I also wanted to show like, I'm capable of communicating my ideas, right? And I think YouTube's a great platform because a lot of what you're doing in an agency setting, especially, is communicating with clients. So I wanted to show I at least have some skills and like confidence communicating my ideas. And it just so happened, like as this channel grew, it hasn't grown like huge or anything, but I've gotten enough eyes on it where sometimes people hit me up for work. Sometimes like I was able to work with like one really big agency on the HBO Max product, which was a really cool project, and that all happened through YouTube. So it was kind of a happy accident. So I will say to that point, obviously, networking is huge, like for getting freelance clients, but also just building some sort of personal brand. So whether that's YouTube or Dribbble, or if your portfolio is easily accessible and like people can find it really easily and see the work you're capable of doing and get in contact with you, I think that's a great way to get freelance work. There's also, I know in like hotbed design areas, like I'm in LA and like San Francisco, obviously, and probably New York. Some of these places have Slack groups dedicated for designers and developers. And I know the one I'm in, like they're always posting like jobs, like freelance jobs sometimes. So like those are really good places. Also like Facebook groups exist for this same reason. So you kind of just got to put yourself out there and, you'll find work eventually, but you definitely need a portfolio because like no one's going to hire you if they can't see your work. Do you do portfolio reviews? Yes. I actually, damn it. It was when I started this live stream and then I had to like cut it off. I guess the description got deleted, but you can send me your portfolio to this email address. I'm going to put it in the chat. The plan is once I get like enough portfolios, I'll either do a bunch of reviews all at once or sort of space them out over the course of like a series where I'm reviewing a bunch of portfolios. So yeah, feel free to send your work. I just put it in the chat. Can I know how you do documentation for your design projects? What can you be a little more specific about documentation? Do you mean like creating a formal like design document, or do you mean like a design system, or what? Because those are sort of two separate things, and sometimes the designer owns one and doesn't really own the other. So just be a little more specific. So maybe I can help you. How are whiteboard challenges held online? Yeah, so I just had to do a few of those. They're definitely modified, but the one I had to do most recently, it was pretty simple. Basically, look, they'll tell you like don't prepare, like there's nothing to prepare, to show up with like a notebook or a whiteboard or whatever you want to sketch on. But I did some preparation, and I'll kind of talk through in a separate. I want to make a separate video on this because I want to go pretty deep in it. But basically, what they'll do is they'll give you a prompt. And usually like you'll only have anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour to tackle this. So with that in mind, obviously time is a huge constraint. So you're not gonna, you go into these whiteboard reviews saying like, okay, I'm not gonna have time to do user research. So you have to make a bunch of assumptions and you have to kind of put constraints on yourself. But they'll give you a prompt. So say it's like, I don't know, design an interface for a kiosk, or design a kiosk for refilling shampoo. I don't know, something random like that. And what they want to see, they're not going to like expect like amazing, UI design sketches or anything. What they want to see is your process, like how you would go about solving that problem. So usually it's kind of like a live working relationship with your interviewer. And sometimes they'll sort of play the role of the client. So you can sort of tailor your questions more in that sense. Like, you could ask questions like, well, what is the goal of this design? Like, what are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? What problems are we facing? And then as you ask more questions, you get more information. And then ultimately you want to like have enough information about the goals as well as who you're designing for, where you're able to eventually start sketching solutions. And they're not so much concerned about like the fidelity and like what your sketches look like. I'm a terrible artist, by the way. Mine were pretty horrible, but my product thinking was what, impress them, I think. So that's what it'll be. They'll give you some sort of prompt. It might be very specific. They might tell you like we specifically want a mobile app, but sometimes they might not even say like they'll just say design an interface for this kiosk, or they'll say design an interface for X, Y, and Z. And then through your questioning, you might have to determine like what is the best interface. Is it a website? Is it a mobile app? Is it a Google Doc? Like, because maybe one of their constraints is like, oh, we only have $1,000 to do this, right? Like you're probably not gonna be able to build a mobile app with $1,000. So like based on what they tell you, you have to come up with the solution that makes the most sense for not only the business, but their user needs, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a typical like whiteboard scenario. And again, I'll get into some frameworks that you can use to help you in the whiteboard test scenario, but that's generally how they go. Do I have to post daily on Dribbble, Behance, or Instagram? Absolutely not. I don't even have a Dribbble. So, because again, I'm kind of like I'm not anti-Dribbble, but I'm anti the Dribbleization of design. It's like as a recruiter, and I'm someone who's like interviewed a lot of people for design teams. Like if their only portfolio is a Dribbble, it might get them in the door, but sometimes it's really easy to tell like if they're just in this for creating visual design concepts, or maybe they're even copying other designers. Like, how am I to know that this is like their own thought process? Like, I need to see a little more beyond than just the visuals. So yeah, you definitely don't need to post daily on those. I mean, I only have like 3 or 4 projects on my portfolio. So Documentation for handoff. Oh, so this was, how can I know? Oh, okay. So documentation for handoff. I'm assuming you mean like handing off screen design, like once as the designer, like you've done all your work as the designer more or less, and you're ready to hand off your screens to the development team and they start building it. Yeah. So I'm pretty thorough when it comes to design systems. For those who don't know, like what a design system is, it's more than just a style guide, right? Like we're sort of, when we talk about style guide, we're usually saying like, here's the font we're using, here are the color, here's our color palette. But a design system, it's a lot more detailed, and we talk about all the different states of all the different components. You can even annotate them. Rather than me trying to explain what a design system is in this live stream, I would just do some research into design systems and how they're beneficial, and that should kind of answer your question. Because that's typically, at least at like the enterprise level, like there's a really big emphasis on having a design system that a developer can refer to when building. Should I just post design or post design with case studies? I'm new, so please tell me how to write a good case study. Yeah, so again, I got this question a lot, and I know it's kind of confusing when you're starting out. So for those who also might be new to like this whole UI UX world, the main doorway into a UI UX position is a case study. And usually it's in the form of like your own personal website. And a case study is basically a few projects that go into detail about how you solve the problem through digital design. Usually like in UI UX design, we're talking about digital product design. Even though like product design could be, you know, industrial product design, like designing a microwave, right? Or it could be, usually we're talking about like apps, websites, those types of things, interface design. But yeah, you'll need, the point of the case study is to show, okay, not only am I a good visual designer, like I understand hierarchy, I understand typography, I understand spacing, I understand all of these, you know, visual design concepts. I can also combine that with my problem solving abilities in the form of a case study. That's what a case study is. It's showing, here's how I solve this problem digitally. So it goes into not only the why, like why we did this, it goes into the who we did this for, and it also kind of gets into the what, right? Like what does it look like? And that's where the visual design stuff comes in. So it's sort of all of those. So to answer your question, if you're going for a UI UX design position, generally people are looking for case studies beyond just visual design. And as far as writing a good case study, I want to do an updated portfolio presentation of the one that just got me hired at a new like lead role. I think it's probably a lot better than the one that was on my channel a while ago, but the one I put on my channel got a lot of good feedback from you guys. And it did help me land my first job. So there, if you just type in on my channel, I think it's just called UX case study example. It will sort of show you how to structure a case study, and it kind of gives you some insight into the human-centered design process. How do you create your user personas? Yeah, so personas, there's a few different like ways of doing personas. I mean, generally what a persona is, it's a fictional representation of the user that you're trying to solve for. So kind of like where in the design process do personas come in? Well, typically it's after you do a bunch of research, you gain some insights. So like say you're trying to solve a very specific problem, like you figured out what problem you're facing as a business or a company. You first want to conduct some research, and typically in the organizational setting, it might not be you doing the research. You might be paired with a researcher who's like dedicated to this stuff, but they'll try to do some research and gain some insights from your user about the problem that you're trying to solve. And then once all that research is collected, you usually synthesize that research into, you try to extract the insights from that research. And then you also try to create personas to give you a sense of who exactly is having this problem. What are their goals? What are their needs? What are their pain points? You know, you can get really in depth with them, but it's generally a fictional representation of the person that you're trying to solve for. So that's how I create. So I'm not sure if you meant like more conceptually, how do you create your personas, or like physically, like do I use Figma or something? Yeah, like sometimes I'll just do them in Figma. You can buy templates. There's a lot of great templates out there. You know, some different companies have different ways of doing personas. Generally, you have like a picture of who, just like to give Basically, you always want to be able to refer to a persona to show like, oh, this is who I'm designing for. It's like always a reminder to yourself as a designer to say like, oh, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I'm designing for this person. When doing research for projects, example for apps, I would usually look into competitors and use the App Store reviews to show problems that need solving within my application. What are some others? Yeah, that's a really good approach. And that's what I would totally do if I wasn't working for a company. And even when I'm working for companies, right? And like say I'm on like a e-commerce site, obviously we don't try to just like copy others. We always want to design for our specific company's problems. But generally, like if you're in a specific industry and say you're designing an e-commerce site, it can't hurt to look at like what Amazon is doing or what Target is doing as far as like how they organize content on the site or like what is their navigation structure. Like I'm always looking at like competitors, even if I'm not like officially documenting it as like an official competitive analysis. Because you can almost guarantee like there is some UI pattern out there that will probably work for your needs. I know that's not like the best approach, and you always want to be like thinking about creating a very custom solution for your particular user and their problems, but it can't hurt to do some competitive analysis, at least when it comes to UI like constructs and patterns. But yeah, that's a really good way of like understanding problems that exist in the current landscape. Go to the App Store, look at the negative reviews. That could be like a good way to conduct some sort of like unsolicited redesign of a product or service. So that's one way. Another way is to do surveys, like to survey people and just like understand their pain points that way. Ask them questions, keep those questions open-ended, and maybe you'll uncover some insights about problems that they're facing. What do UX recruiters look for in portfolio case studies with regards to the apps themselves? Should they be good enough to be taken to market? Thank you. Yeah, so not necessarily. Like when I was first starting out, I hadn't like shipped any real products. Like I had done like a boot camp, so I had like a fictional product there. I had some fictional ideas that I just like solved for digitally. So I think it's more about your process and less so about like, is this a real product? Can it be shipped today? Because usually if you're like a one-man person just trying to create a portfolio piece, especially as a junior designer, like you're not going to design an entire app. Like it's not realistic to think of every single scenario. Usually you want to structure it, like here's how I solved this very specific problem that I was facing. So think of it in terms of like maybe like one or two flows that solve like one or two key problems, just so you have enough screens to show like, here are my screens, here's my visual design skills, and here is, what led to these screens. Here's how I got here. Does that make sense? So what do recruiters look for? So yeah, what a recruiter or a hiring manager would probably look for is they just want to they want to see your product thinking, right? Like how you got to the screens. And obviously like what the screens look like is really important. But it's also like how you got there, what insights you gathered from either your research or, like you said, like going on the App Store and seeing what problems existed, like what they want to see, what problem you solved, how you went about solving it, who you were designing for, and what the screens look like. It's really that simple. Everything else, like these frameworks, like these journey maps and card sorting activities, these are just tools you can use. So if you guys are interested, like, just look at like best UX case studies on Google and you'll see some examples of how people are solving problems and frameworks they're using and whatnot. But yeah. Hello, my question is, on which screen size should I design an app for iOS and Android? My recommendation for that is, especially if you're like the sole designer, it's a little different if you have like a big design team. But if I was like a freelancer, I would design for the screen size that I have. Like I have an iPhone, what is this? I think it's a 10s Max. So I would design on that screen size just so I can always test it on my device. I think that's really important. But if you're designing for like a big company, some people really preach designing for like the smallest possible screen size just to make sure that your designs will respond to the smallest possible version. So like if you're designing for iOS, right? I actually don't even know what the smallest screen size. I think it's 320 pixels across is like their smallest form factor. So like if your designs work on that screen size, you can almost guarantee that they'll scale very well across. So I would do the same thing if you're designing for Android, right? Look at the smallest screen in their lineup and design on that. But again, I think it's so important to always, like if you're designing mobile, especially, always be testing your designs. Like I use Figma, so I use the Figma Viewer app. So like I'm always previewing on my phone, just to make sure, everything looks good. It's a lot harder to tell if I'm just looking in Figma at these artboards. Like, is that it might look good in Figma, like when I'm looking at the computer screen, but once it goes on my phone, I'll notice some things about spacing. So get into the habit of always testing on your phone. Do you believe your portfolio should be quite broad, as in web products, mobile apps, and desktop, or should you keep it very narrow to show your niche, specifically for getting first jobs? That's a good question. I mean, I think as a junior designer trying to land their first job, just do what you can. Like if all your projects are web, then so be it. Like go really deep and just list them all. But if you have enough projects in your tool belt, like if you've been doing this like myself for a few years now, and I've worked with maybe 40 or so clients, like I'm going to pick the three projects that best represent what I do as a designer. And I think I wouldn't call them specialties because I consider myself an end-to-end designer, but places I think I excel are definitely design systems. I have a pretty deep understanding of design systems just because of all the projects I've been on. I've led a lot of design system tracks, motion design. I wouldn't consider myself a user researcher. So a lot of my work, of course, it follows a user-centered process, but I'm usually not the person on my team sitting with users and doing one-on-one interviews. That's just not really what I do. So I'm not really highlighting that stuff as much as a lot of prototyping. Prototyping is a huge part of I prototype everything. I'm a big preacher of prototyping everything, and you guys see what I do on this channel. So yeah, definitely try to I guess play up your strengths where you can. Hopefully that answered your question. But yeah, you're going to have limited projects as a junior designer. So I wouldn't stress too much about designing for all these different platforms. I will say probably having a good mobile, at least one mobile project in there is good, just because everything's mobile nowadays. Everyone's shifting their capabilities to work on mobile basically. Because the developers ask me for assets in so many different sizes for iOS and Android, and it's so frustrating. Yeah, so they really shouldn't be doing that. There should be an understanding, especially if you start with your smallest screen size, that should be able to scale up as long as you define what the breakpoint is. Usually we deliver mobile, tablet, and desktop. So you sort of define that up front, and then you make screen designs for all of those, and you should be good. If a developer is asking you to design for every single screen size in the lineup, then they're probably not a great developer, because everything should be built in a responsive framework. So all your design should respond to these different screen sizes. I use Adobe Illustrator and Adobe XD. Should I put other software in use? My answer to that would be, do you think something is missing in your workflow? Is there something that you're not able to achieve with those tools? And if so, then yeah, maybe explore some other tools. I think we tend to get caught up a bit in all the design tools. I know it's pretty overwhelming, and I use a bunch of tools myself, but yeah, just do what works for you. If you think that you need another tool, then yeah, try learning another tool. It is helpful to know a few, but absolutely exhaust one tool until you absolutely need another one, and then learn another one. Maybe that's the approach. But yeah, I know a lot of designers who use Adobe XD, especially if they mostly do UI, UX design, and they're not necessarily doing a lot of photo manipulation or anything. You could probably get by with just Adobe XD or any other UI design software. I use Figma, but they all pretty much do the same thing. Do you have any key advice for college students, specifically with regards to entry-level positions? Yeah, so I did kind of just talk about that, but college students, I will say, if you're looking for a UI UX design job right out of school, I think it's always controversial when I say this, but you probably should be focusing more on your visual design skills at this point in time. Because I talked about in my last stream, it's almost just a prerequisite these days to have decent visual design skills, and then everything else you'll probably learn on the job. This isn't to say you shouldn't have some sort of broad understanding of the end-to-end product design process, but you don't have to go so deep in it, especially as a college student. But yeah, college is great because you're surrounded by so many people. So it's a great place to network. There's also, you might become aware of problems that you're facing on campus. And those are great opportunities to maybe design digital solutions and create case studies. That's what I did when I was in college. So that's maybe what I would do. As far as like entry-level positions, just apply, see what's out there. I know some design teams are offering like apprenticeship programs where maybe you're not coming in as like the lead designer on a project, but you're more or less like shadowing the lead designer. So you're still gaining an understanding, but you just don't have as much responsibility from the get-go. These are all great questions, guys, and thank you for everyone who's been asking them. I hope I answered your question. A quick follow-up. In the interview, would there be questions on visual design principles, or is it more or less shown through your casework? Yeah, I think it's just like really easy. Like I could tell right away if someone's taken the time to refine their visual design craft. So typically, again, depends on the exact role that you're interviewing for, but assuming it's a hybrid UI UX position, I think the work generally speaks for itself. I think it is important though to like, say you're walking through a case study with a recruiter and you stop to look at your screens that you've designed. They might ask a question like, why did you make this button this color, right? Maybe it's like a CTA that's meant to call attention to something. And you could just say like, well, I made it this red because I really wanted to draw the eye, or like make it known that this was a destructive state. Like once the user presses this button, something's, it's going to be destructive in nature. So always just like get in the habit of really thinking about the why behind all of your decisions, even at the UI visual design level. Always ask why. It's like, why did I make this button this shape? Why did I round the corners? Why did I add a drop shadow? Why did I use this style navigation menu? Like, why did I do this? Like, what value does it serve? Why did I make the navigation sticky? Why did I add this parallax animation, right? Like, how does it relate to the brand, what they're trying to accomplish, right? It's not just like doing, of course, like at some point there are going to be just like design decisions made. Like maybe it's just like a purely aesthetic decision sometimes, but it's always good to be able to say like, I chose this color palette or this color scheme because these are the brand colors, right? Like you're not just doing stuff arbitrarily. Really try to get out of the habit of just doing things arbitrarily. If you really want to play yourself up as like a really user-centered designer, always thinking about the user and always thinking about the business. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Calvin? Any other questions? These have all been great. I really appreciate you guys asking. Cool. Glad it was helpful. Yeah, all good questions. I'm really excited to let you guys know like what's happening with my life. I just legally can't at the moment, but I'll probably have an update next week. I do really enjoy these live streams though. I know I don't have too many subscribers, but I think once I sort of hopefully if I reach a critical mass, like these could be like a fun, weekly or bi-weekly thing we can do. And I want to be a resource for you guys because I know there's almost too much information out there, especially on YouTube. Like there's just not a lot. Like speaking from experience, most of the stuff on YouTube is purely centered around like visual design stuff. Even my stuff included. It's just a lot easier to make visual design tutorials than talk about the end-to-end design process because every company and every problem we're solving is so specific usually. So it's hard to say like blanket statements about like, here's how you do things, right? Every project I've been on is so specific. So I'm trying to think of ways to really expand your knowledge beyond just visual design and interaction design stuff on this channel. Should you always try and design catered towards a company you would like to work in? That's a good question. I don't think we always have the luxury realistically to be able to do that. If you want to create like full case studies, I think you sort of have to work with what's available, like what experience you've gained. That said, like, for example, one of these roles I was interviewing for was a design system lead role. So the project I chose to walk through with them was a project in which I led a design system track. So obviously, that project would appeal to their needs. But not everyone has that luxury, or not everyone has that many projects under their belt where they can sort of pick and choose and tailor their project work to a specific role. So I will say, just like whatever's on your portfolio, find a way to tie it back to the company's needs, right? Even if it's like a completely different industry or a completely different problem we're solving, you can always sort of find a way to connect with that company. A big part about being a successful designer is being able to sell and defend your design decisions. So keep that in mind, like when you're presenting a case study, just like always be able to answer, like, here's why I did this. And yeah, here's how it helped us solve this problem, stuff like that. Just getting that mindset. What made you switch from management consulting to UX UI, and how was the transition process? Good question. I've talked about this in one of my earlier videos, I think, but yeah. So I guess the answer was when I was an undergrad, so when I was like a junior into my senior year in college, I was actually a finance major, believe it or not. I did a few internships in finance. I thought I would go work for a bank or something on like Wall Street and crunch numbers all day. I don't know why. I guess I was just in that mindset, like that's what you do. You go to college, you study finance, you work at a bank. I don't know. And I did 2 internships in the financial services industry as like a financial analyst, and absolutely hated it. I realized early on, like I wanted to get as far away from that world as possible. But yeah, like my junior year, I happened to get involved with this mobile app startup, and I wasn't the designer on the project, but I was basically helping this app launch at my university. And during that process, I got really close with their lead designer and one of their co-founders, who was this former consultant, really bright guy, but was also like super creative. So I got to see how he was using his creative problem-solving skills to design solutions. And like he was using Sketch at the time, so I like got some insight into his workflow and the tools he was using. And I was like, I want to do that. That seems really cool. So in the back of my mind, I sort of knew that's what I wanted to do and the direction I wanted to go in. But landing a job right out of school with no like technical design skills or like design background was going to be really hard. So I actually ended up joining a management consulting firm with a really heavy emphasis in digital. Like that's kind of their bread and butter, is like digital projects. I mean, everything's digital nowadays, right? It's a big buzzword, but this company in particular, like that's sort of what they're known for. It's like digital consulting. So I knew like if I joined that company, I would not only, even as a consultant, I would get some exposure to like the digital product design process, but because the place is so big and there's so many opportunities within the company, I would eventually be able to probably land a role, like a UX focused role. And that's what I did. I ended up doing like an internal transfer within the company. Still had to interview and everything, but by that point I had enough personal projects and enough project experience, not necessarily as like the lead designer on a project, but just like enough to be able to say like, I understand this. And I was fortunate. Well, I worked really hard for it, but I was also fortunate that one of these hiring managers took a chance on me and just kind of threw me into the fire and was like, figure this out. And I had no choice. It was like sink or swim. And I learned really quickly. And that was that. So I would say the transition, I don't know if it was like it wasn't the most linear process into UX. Like I didn't study design or everything. I was like completely self-taught. But I think, I don't know, just having this knowing of like, this is what I wanted to do made it that much easier to get, good enough where I could do it full time as my profession, just because I enjoyed it so much. I think that's really important, right? You have to ask yourself, like, why are we doing this? Like, is it just to make money? Is it to work on cool stuff? Or is it like, do you really enjoy doing it? And for me, like, that's what keeps me going. And that's why I'm, dedicating so much of my time to UX and design, just because I'm really passionate about it. So hopefully that answered your question, Calvin. Can you explain what a design system is? Yeah, so at its very, I don't want to reduce a design system to just a few words because they can be pretty complex, but at the core, a design system is a way to document all of the paradigms within your screen design. So like you want to document all the components, right? And a component are like the little pieces in your UI that make up the screen. So like you have your buttons, you have your controls, you have your, form inputs, you have your navigational elements. It's a place to document all that stuff. So basically yourself or another designer on your team can pull these components and start building new screens with previously documented components. So think of components as like building blocks, and the design system is what contains all of these building blocks. And they can be used by not only designers, but also it's like what developers use to build components in code. So think of it almost as like a style guide on steroids, like where a style guide stops at just like the basic visuals, right? Like the colors, the shadows, the type. It goes beyond that and tells you like how to use, how and when to use like particular components and particular templates. And they can be super detailed. I recommend looking at like material design guidelines. That's Google's design system. Also, Apple has their human interface guidelines, and it's just a ton of documentation around like how to use certain constructs basically within the design library. So that's probably not the best explanation, but I do plan on doing a whole series about like how to actually construct design systems, because in watching me do that, I think you'll understand more the value of design systems and how beneficial they are once you start scaling up. Like sometimes you're working on products with millions of users. Like I've worked on products with literally millions of users. So as you start coming up with new features for these products, you don't want to be recreating the wheel all the time and like having to create, you know, components from scratch every time you want to use something. You want to be able to pull from a library and use these components and these constructs to build new screens and even new products, right? So Brappleberry Pie. Hopefully that sort of answered your question. Yes, and I relate to the finance major currently transitioning to UX through a boot camp and personal projects while still in undergrad. Yeah, I mean, good for you for just like being aware of like, you know, where your head's at. And if you think this is the direction you want to go in, just like go all in and you'll learn a lot really quickly. And my opinion is this is one of the most rewarding careers you could have, especially if you're like, I do think it requires a certain type of person to excel in this career. Like usually this type of person is a little more creatively inclined. They probably have some like artistic or visual tendencies, more of those like right-brained ideas people like myself. That's not to say you can't be like completely analytical and left-brained and also excel in this industry, but just from personal experience, like the best designers I know are usually sort of like creatively inclined. So if that sounds like you're probably in the right place. Do you think that design systems are important for portfolios too? Yeah, I mean, for one of these roles I interviewed for, the role was literally for design system lead. So in that case, obviously, right, a design system is going to be really important. I think once you get into like senior design positions and even lead design positions, like there is an expectation that you have some experience either constructing your own design systems or, you know, using a design system, and you understand the value they bring to a business. But that's also to say, like, if you don't have any design system projects in your portfolio, that could be a good way to show your understanding of design systems, because I've been seeing a lot more roles pop up recently where there's like design system specialists, and oftentimes this is like it's like more of a technical role. So it's like you either know it or you don't. You know how to build them. You know about atomic design and responsive design and all this stuff. And you can just check that box. So it is a good box to be able to check just to sort of increase your value as a designer. And it does open the door to more, I want to say like niche positions than like an end-to-end product designer. Because those are the roles, like the end-to-end product designer, like the product design generalist roles are usually the ones that most people are competing for, which leaves these other roles like wide open. And the pay is usually just as good, if not higher. I mean, if that's something that really matters to you, it could be a good avenue to explore. Lol, forgive the name, I made it when I was 14. I'm transitioning from a graphic designer, so I'm finding the UI side a bit easier, but struggling on the UX side. Yeah, I mean, I think that's natural. I think, again, a lot of people maybe think of design as like what you see on Dribbble, and that's not necessarily a problem. Like Dribble's a great resource, but Dribbble is literally called like show and tell for designers. Like that's like their tagline. So what you're showing and telling is usually the final result of everything that happened in that design process. It's literally like the tip of the iceberg, which is great. Like it's amazing to show like here's, after like months of work, here's what we came up with. But a lot of times Dribbble doesn't go into everything else, right, that went into it. It doesn't go into the research. It doesn't go into all the research you did about the problem space and defining your users and such. So oftentimes like the UI is easier because it's like, like I think it's a lot easier just to start designing screens than to solve a problem, in my opinion. But it is very important too, right? Like you could have like really amazing user research done and like all these robust journey maps and pitch decks and everything. And then when you go to design the screens, if it's actual crap and it looks terrible and users don't want to use it, like the UX has failed, right? So they're both really important. It goes both ways too, right? Like you could have the most beautiful UI design, like really pretty interfaces, like really delightful experience. But if it's not actually solving a problem, right? Like if there was no need in the marketplace for this product, then the UX has failed. So both are equally important. And that's why it's important to get out of the habit of like differentiating UX from UI, I think, especially these days, because it's sort of an expectation that they're all part of the same process. So it's very rare that it's a lot more rare that a company is going to hire you specifically to do UI. Like you're going to have your foot in a few different areas. You're going to wear a few different hats typically. And you're going to have to have some sort of understanding of the total end-to-end process. You guys can hear me okay, right? Can you like put a thumbs up in the chat or something? Or just say you can? Cool. I'm assuming you can, but there we go. Cool. Yeah, well, do you guys have any other questions? These have all been really great and relevant questions, and questions I definitely had as well at some point. Do you have any things you do every day to improve your visual design skills? I'm currently copying UI screens by hand and moving on to Figma copies. I'm not sure how beneficial the copying by hand part is, but if it works for you, it works for you. I mean, that is a good approach. I think copying top designers is a really good approach. Yeah, I mean, for me, like I'm literally designing every single day, just like as a profession. So like I'm obviously going to get better over time. So I would recommend, yeah, just every day, just make sure you're just sharpening the tools, so to speak. Also beyond just visual design, like start looking at problems, right? And there's if you type in like sample UX problems on Google, like there'll be like a list of problems, like design a web app for a freelancer, right? And then you start thinking, oh, like what would this interface look like? And start thinking of it more in that sense than just like, I'm going to design this interface and make it look really pretty. Start thinking about like the problem you're trying to solve, and then what in turn does the interface look like, you know? But yeah, just doing something every day is really important. And yeah, you'll be well on your way. Just so I prepare, how many people in a panel are generally interviewing you? And do they help you if you get stuck? I'm picturing it would be like talking to a project team. Again, it depends on the size of the design team. So I just interviewed for an agency, and my final whiteboarding interview was only 2 people, and it was virtual. And yeah, they generally will help you if you get stuck, but it's more about, look, they're not expecting you to like conduct a bunch of user research or anything. Like you're only going to have, 30 minutes to an hour typically. So you have to make some assumptions, right? Like you have to be like, oh, well, like based on the scenario you gave me, I'm assuming that your user is 25 to whatever, 40 years old. And, these are typically what this type of user typically experiences. And based on what I know about the industry and the app currently, here are some things I think they, could use or might be struggling with, right? So it's all about like making assumptions, and it's all about saying stuff out loud so they can. That's one really important part about these whiteboarding interviews. You don't want to do them in silence. Like you always want to be just articulating what's happening. You can always be writing stuff down or asking more questions. And like I said, sometimes they'll play more of the role of a client. So they'd be like the subject matter expert, or sometimes they're sort of like a third party like voice to say like, they'll sort of guide you along. It's like, okay, this is great, but maybe we only have 15 minutes. So like, let's start sketching solutions now. So I guess my roundabout answer is it depends. But it kind of comes down to you being the one guiding the interview. Like you are pushing the pace of it. You are asking questions. Once you feel like you have enough information gathered, you sort of move on to maybe the next stage. And hopefully they'll jump in when necessary. If you have a whiteboarding test coming up, good luck. I recommend a really good resource for you. Let me pull it up real quick. If you do a Google search for solving problem or solving product, I can't type, I'm sorry, product design problems. If you do a Google search for that, this dude who used to work at WeWork and was part of their product design team, like came up with this. It's a really awesome framework, which is a really great framework to understand when going into these interviews that you can follow. He has a course. It's like $80, but I think it's well worth it. One thing is, like, it's probably stuff you already know. He's just helping you like frame it in a way that you're able to leverage it in the given amount of time that you have. So yeah, it's a really great resource. I would highly recommend. Any other questions? These are all been great. We've been on for what? A little over an hour. Wow, time flies. But yeah, if you guys don't have any other questions, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Yeah, feel free. If you guys want me to go through portfolios, you can email me. I'll drop my, it's literally just jpdesignacademy@gmail.com. If you want to send me an email with your link to your portfolio, I can go through it at gmail.com. Hi, Syed. Just got here, but love your stuff. Thank you. Appreciate it. Welcome. Yeah, we've been on for like an hour or so, just asking questions. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any way I can help. Yeah, we're just kind of hanging out here tonight. Been a lot of great questions from this group. You guys working on anything cool? I got to figure out how to screen share on this because I really like this format. I have a really hard time like just planning videos ahead. I like the spontaneous nature of this. And in the past two live streams, I've seen a lot of the same questions, which means I should probably go a little deeper into these areas. So I'll make like a separate video, but yeah, if there's anything pressing right now, happy to address it. I'm assuming most of my audience, like it would only make sense that most of my audience are like sort of junior designers, maybe trying to break in. Again, as a UX designer, I'm always trying to understand like who I'm doing this for, like who is my user, right? Like, and based on these questions, it seems like most of you guys are either just starting out or maybe you're transitioning careers. So I'd love to be a resource in your journey. Any ideas for future videos? I want to give as much content as possible, but it's sometimes hard. I don't want to repeat myself, and I don't want to be the one just like doing what everyone else is doing, like, you know, Adobe XD tutorials or Figma tutorials. Like I think for the most part, most of my audience at least has some understanding of UI design. So I want to show you some stuff that maybe doesn't already exist. So. What do you think separates a junior from a midweight? So like a junior to like mid-senior. Yeah, I think some of the stuff I just talked about, like a junior designer typically probably, like if they're getting hired, they probably have a decent baseline level of visual design skills and like a decent baseline level of the end-to-end process. But a senior designer, I think even by senior level, they're probably expected to be able to, you know, take the lead, be sort of like the main voice of the product team in communicating their ideas to the client, being able to defend their design decisions. They're obviously going to have their visual design skills are going to be a little more refined. Maybe they know a bit more about design systems. They've probably just been on a few projects already, so they get the lay of the land. They just like understand what a typical product design process looks like because they've been through it, whereas a junior designer might not have been through anything yet. So it just comes with every sort of level of seniority comes more responsibility. I mean, that's a good way to think of it. And that's obviously why you get paid more once you get to sort of like senior lead level, creative director level, like you'll get paid more. I will say junior designers and senior designers are typically the ones that are like doing the hands-on digital design, like the production level design. Whereas once you get into the lead level, like creative director level, you're more, I mean, sometimes you can be really plugged into the product side too. But more often than not, you're sort of the one managing the work streams. You're managing the designers on your team. You're the main communicator between the product team and the clients. And I talked about this in my last video. There's sort of two avenues that you can go in the product design space. Like you can sort of, like the avenue I'm sort of pursuing right now, because I love designing so much, like I always want to be plugged into the actual like craft of designing. Like I think I really enjoy working in Figma. Like I never want to be just the person, you know, making sales decks and talking to the client and managing teams. Like I think there's a good part of there's part of that I enjoy, but I always want to be plugged into the actual product side of things. And yeah, so that's one avenue, is like lead designer, where you have some managerial experience, but you're always plugged in the product side. And then the other avenue is like product design manager, where you're really the one managing all of the work streams and making sure work is delivered on time. It's almost like a hybrid design manager and product manager. Like they can be, I've seen them sort of like one and the same. I have that book. Oh, nice. Yeah, he has an ebook version. Yeah, it's some really good stuff in there. Again, it's just a framework at the end of the day. Like it's probably stuff you already know, but it's really helpful to be able to organize your thoughts in a very constrained time period, which is why I like it. How long do you think you should stay a junior if you gather those skills rather quickly? Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of like, if you have the skills, you have the skills. Like you shouldn't be constrained to like, you know, you're required to have 2 or 3 years at junior level before you become like more senior level. Like I've seen junior designers with like a few years of official, you know, product design experience, doing better work than like seniors and leads. So I think it really should all be based on your talent and based on your experience, and you can get experience in many different ways. Like me personally, like right now, like I said in my last stream, I think I've only been an official like product designer, like where that's been my title, for like 3 years, I would say. But I did 2 years as a management consulting on digital delivery. So like I got an additional 2 years exposure to the process, where I wasn't necessarily like the lead designer, but I was still really plugged into the process. I was more of like a business analyst on those roles, which is like basically what a modern day product designer is. You're kind of like a hybrid business analyst and a designer. So I think you could add those 2 years, right? And I've also done a lot of freelance work. And this year, especially, I pretty much worked 3 full-time jobs at once. So like you can maybe add on another 2-3 years to that. So I think in total, if you're looking at total time spent, you know, probably somewhere, you know, the equivalent of someone with like 6 or 7 years of experience, which is why I think I've been able to like interview recently for like lead roles, and I'm being considered more for these lead roles now. I think as long as you're able to like sort of sell your experience and say, here's what I did. I think don't pay too much attention to like the years of experience on paper. If that makes sense. I'm a UI UX designer. Can I change my work title to product designer? Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit earlier. Like the title, you started seeing the title product designer sort of pop up around Silicon Valley because, again, they got a little bit, sorry, let me turn off my iMessage. They started getting a little greedy because they wanted sort of like the hybrid business analyst and designer in one, and that was sort of what a product designer was. It's someone who's not only thinking about the user needs, but also the business needs and goals. So like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world started labeling this role as more of a product designer, which is someone who really is like an end-to-end designer, like thinking about all the different touch points and all the different stakeholders involved in the product design process. And then every other company started copying Google and these companies and just changing their name from UI UX to product designer, even though they're more or less like none of their roles really changed. They're still focused mostly on the user. So I think you probably could, but if you're interviewing at a place like Google or like one of these big tech companies, like they'll probably expect a little more from you on like the actual business side of things, right? Like how are we thinking about how this product is going to help the business? Like how does this help our position in the marketplace? Like more of those types of questions, like business oriented questions, in addition to how does this help the user actually using this product, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would probably recommend changing your title to product designer just because it might make you a little more competitive in the marketplace, and like, it might increase your chances of getting noticed because everyone's changing their title, but that is the distinction. But I don't think a lot of companies really understand that distinction. They're sort of just copying the Googles and the Facebooks. Do you accept requests on LinkedIn? Would love to connect. Yeah, of course. You guys can look me up. My name is Jake Pomper. Yeah, happy to help. Yeah, I will say I'm going to be pretty busy the next month or so getting settled in my new role, but yeah, happy to help. I'm going to keep doing these live streams, I think, as much as I can, as long as enough people show up. It doesn't look like many people are here at all, but I've still gotten so many great questions, and hopefully this is valuable to those in the chat. And if it is, just let me know, or let me know if there's something I can do to improve. Hopefully I'm not rambling too much. I tend to do that. If you're looking for a candidate, what would you like to know about him, and what would you like to see in his work? Yeah, so again, depends on the role that you're interviewing for, but generally, if you're going for a hybrid UI UX, product design position, as it's typically called these days, I want to see not only a high level of craft, like visual design skills, like clearly someone who's been putting in the time and really refining their UI design skills, but I also want to see how you got there, right? I don't necessarily care what tools, what methods exactly you use to get from point A to point B, but I need to see some sort of logical thought process, because that is the differentiator between a modern product designer and a graphic designer, right? A graphic designer is more or less just focusing on what something looks like, and that's great. That's a big part of it, right? You need to have a solid package of your product that the user is actually going to be using and interacting with. But I also care about how you got there. What was your problem solving process like? What problem were you trying to solve? Again, start with the why. Why are we doing this in the first place? What problem were we trying to solve? What impact does this have on users and the business, right? Kind of start more philosophical, high level. Why are we doing this in the first place? Why is this worth our time? Does something exist already out there? Is there a gap in the market right now where we need this product right now? So start with why, and then kind of move into who, right? Who are we doing this for? Who's our audience? Are there different segmentations of their audience? Are we solving for everyone? Are we solving for a previously underserved audience? Start thinking about who exactly our user is. What are their goals? What is the context in which they're using this product? And once you get to that stage, that's when you can start introducing tools like a journey map to really help you understand your user and what they're going through at any given time. And then you get into the what, which is the visual design. And having that holistic view is what I'm looking for as someone trying to hire someone. Hopefully that answered your question, big boss. Can I do a case study for fake projects? Yeah, I wouldn't even use the term fake projects. It's all real. It all matters. Look, the goal is to show your product thinking here and your visual design skills. So I don't care if you're designing for a Fortune 500 company or if this is all conceptual, as long as you're following a process, this process can be applied to pretty much any project that you're on. Obviously, once you start working with the Fortune 500, these are massive multinational companies. there's so many moving parts and so many, SMEs, we call them subject matter experts that you have to, talk to get information about. It's usually a lot harder and slower moving once you get to that level, just because the scale is larger. But for the most part, the process isn't going to change all that much. So yeah, don't even call these fake projects. If there's a problem that exists and you can solve it digitally, that has a lot of merit. I don't care what anyone tells you. That's what I did. That's how I originally got hired, and that's what everyone does when they're starting out. Even these boot camps, right? That's pretty much what they are. They're fake products. Most of these aren't ever built. They're just illustrating your thought process and your visual design skills. Great question. It's been a rock star group in here. It's been pretty much the same people the whole hour and a half, but a lot of great questions and I hope this was helpful. But yeah, I am noticing a lot of the same questions, which is a good thing, which means I should go deeper into them. So I have some ideas for videos now. Cool, guys. Well, if there's nothing else, really appreciate your time. Happy Friday for those in America. Yeah, I look forward to doing this more. Again, feel free to send me your portfolios for a review, because I want to do a separate either series or just like a separate video reviewing some portfolios, some stuff that you should be doing, maybe some stuff you could do differently. I think that'll be really helpful to see. But yeah, thanks for your time. Thank you, Calvin. Appreciate it. You're very welcome. And yeah, I look forward to doing more of these. Have a great night, everyone.